Welcome to Story Medicine. I'm Joe Summerfield. For over 20 years, I have been working to better understand and support people in navigating this human experience. I've come to believe that stories are encoded with the collective wisdom of all who have come before us, that they bring us into connection with the collective unconscious and contain treasure waiting to be decoded. This podcast explores traditional tales through that lens. Each episode offers a story told in full, an exploration of the medicine it may carry, and questions to help you integrate that medicine. Today's story comes from the oral traditions of the Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian peoples of the Pacific Northwest coast. This is a living tradition, and I approach it as an outsider with a deep respect for the communities who have kept this story alive through countless generations. The version I'm working with today comes from Bill Reed, a Haida artist and author, and Robert Bringhurst, who have collaborated to bring these stories to wider audiences. There are many variants of this tale across the Pacific Northwest coast nations, each reflecting the particular wisdom of that community. It's called Raven Steals the Light. Let's begin. Before there was anything, before animals walked the earth, before trees covered the land, before the birds flew or the fish swam in the sea, an old man lived in a house on the bank of a river with his only child, a daughter. At that time the whole world was dark, inky, pitchy, all-consuming dark, blacker than 1,000 stormy winter midnights, blacker than anything, anywhere that has ever been since. The reason for all this blackness had to do with the old man in the house by the river. He had a box, and inside that box was another box, and inside that box was another box, on and on, boxes within boxes, each nestled inside one only slightly larger, until finally there was a box so small that all it could contain was all the light in the universe. And the old man kept it hidden away. Now, the raven existed at that time because Raven had always existed and always would. And Raven was considerably less than satisfied with this state of affairs. All this darkness led to an awful lot of blundering around and bumping into things. It slowed him down terribly in his pursuit of food and other fleshly pleasures, and in his constant effort to interfere with things and change them. Eventually, his bumbling about in the dark took him close to the home of the old man by the river. He heard a little sing-song voice muttering away. Then he followed the sound, and he came to the wall of the house. Placing his ear against the planking, he could just about make out the words, "I have a box, and inside the box is another box. Inside there are many more boxes, and in the smallest box of all is all the light in the world, and it's mine, and I'll never give any of it to anyone, not even my daughter." It took Raven only an instant to decide to steal the light for himself, but it took much longer to invent a way to do it. First, he had to find a door to the house, but no matter how many times he circled it, no matter how carefully he felt the planking, it remained a smooth, unbroken barrier. Sometimes he heard either the old man or his daughter leave the house, to get water or for some other reason, but they always departed from the opposite side, and when he ran around, the wall seemed as unbroken as ever. Finally, Raven retired a little way upstream. He thought and thought about how he could enter the house, and as he did so, he began to think more and more of the young woman who lived there. Thinking of her began to stir more than just Raven's imagination. "She's probably as homely as a sea slug," he said to himself. "But on the other hand, she may be as beautiful as the fronds of the hemlock against the bright spring sunrise, if only there were enough light to make one." And in that idle speculation he found the solution to his problem. He waited until the young woman came to the river to gather water, and then he changed himself into a single hemlock needle and dropped himself into the water, and floated down just in time to be caught up in the basket that the girl was dipping into the water. Even in his much diminished form, Raven was able to make very small magic, enough to make the girl terribly thirsty, so she took a deep drink from the basket and swallowed the needle. Raven slithered down deep into her warm insides, found a soft, comfortable spot, transformed himself once more, this time into a very small human being, and went to sleep for a long time. And as he slept, he grew. The young girl had no idea what was happening to her. Of course, she didn't tell her father, who noticed nothing unusual because it was so dark, until suddenly he became very aware indeed of a new presence in the house, as Raven at last emerged triumphantly in the shape of a human boy-child. He was a strange-looking boy, with a long beak-like nose and a few feathers here and there. He had the shining eyes of Raven, which gave his face a bright, inquisitive appearance, although of course nobody could see these features in the dark. And he was noisy. He had a cry that contained all of the noises of a demanding child and an angry raven. Yet he could sometimes speak as softly as the wind in the hemlock boughs, with an echo of that beautiful sound, like an organic bell which is a part of every raven's speech. At times like that, his grandfather grew to love this strange new member of the household. He spent many hours playing with him, making him toys, inventing games. And as Raven gained more of the old man's affection and confidence, he felt more intently around the house, trying to find where the light was hidden. After much exploration, he was convinced that it was kept in a big box which stood in the corner of the house. So one day, he cautiously lifted the lid. Of course, he could see nothing, and all he could feel was another box. But his grandfather heard his precious treasure chest being disturbed, and he dealt very harshly with the would-be thief, threatening dire punishment if the Raven child ever touched the box again. This triggered a tidal wave of noisy protests, followed by tender begging. The Raven never mentioned the light, he only pleaded for the largest box. That box, said the Raven child, was the only thing he needed to be completely happy. As most grandfathers have done since the beginning, the old man finally yielded and gave his grandchild the outermost box. This contented the boy for a short time, but as most grandchildren have done since the beginning, the Raven soon demanded the next box. It took many days and much cajoling, carefully balanced with well-planned tantrums, but one by one the boxes were removed. When only a few were left, a strange radiance, never before seen, began to infuse the darkness of the house, disclosing vague shapes and their shadows, still too dim to have definite form. The Raven child then begged in his most pitiful voice to be allowed to hold the light for just a moment. His request was instantly refused, but, of course, in time his grandfather yielded. The old man lifted the light in the form of a beautiful, incandescent ball from the final box and tossed it to his grandson. He had only a glimpse of the child on whom he had lavished such love and affection, for even as the light travelled towards him, the child changed from his human form to a huge, shining black shadow, wings spread and beak open, waiting. The Raven snapped up the light in his jaws, thrust his great wings downwards, and shot through the smoke hole of the roof into the huge darkness of the world. The world was at once transformed. Mountains and valleys were starkly silhouetted. The river sparkled with broken reflections. Everywhere life began to stir. And from far away, another great winged shape launched itself into the air as light struck the eyes of Eagle for the first time and showed him his target. The Raven flew on, rejoicing in his wonderful new possession, admiring the effect that it had on the world below, reveling in the experience of being able to see where he was going instead of flying blind and hoping for the best. He was having such a good time that he never saw the eagle until the eagle was almost upon him. In a panic, he swerved to escape the savage outstretched claws, and in doing so, he dropped a good half of the light he was carrying. It fell onto the rocky ground below and immediately smashed into pieces. One large piece and too many small ones to count. Upon shattering, they bounced right back up into the sky, and they remain there even today for us to see as the moon and the stars that glorify the night. The eagle pursued the Raven beyond the rim of the world, And there, exhausted by the long chase, the raven finally let go of the last piece of light. Out beyond the rim of the world, it floated gently on the clouds and started up over the mountains lying to the east. Its first rays caught the smoke hole of the house by the river, where the old man sat weeping bitterly over the loss of his precious light and the treachery of his grandchild. But as the light reached in, he looked up, and for the first time he saw his daughter, who had been sitting quietly through all of this, completely bewildered by the rush of events. The old man saw that she was as beautiful as the fronds of hemlock against the spring sky at sunrise. And in seeing her truly for the first time, something began to shift within him. Part 2. The Medicine. On the surface, this is a tale of how Raven, through trickery and transformation, brought light into a world that had been kept in darkness. But as with all stories that have been told and retold across generations, there are depths beneath depths here. Before we explore deeper, if you know somebody who might appreciate this story's medicine right now, please share this episode with them. And if you're enjoying this podcast and would like to help others find it too, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. Thank you. So, this is a creation story, but it's a very particular kind of creation. Unlike many traditions where light comes through divine decree or cosmic forces beyond human, or in this case animal, influence, here light enters the world through cunning, transformation, and what we might call theft. The trickster brings consciousness itself into being. Let's begin with the raven as an archetypal figure. In Pacific Northwest coast traditions, Raven is both creator and chaos bringer, sacred and profane, wise and foolish all at once. We might recognize this as the trickster archetype, that figure who exists at the boundaries, who breaks rules precisely because those rules need breaking, and who brings transformation through disruption. But Raven is more complex than the European trickster figures. He's not simply mischievous. He's a transformer, someone who changes form, changes situations, changes the fundamental structure of reality. This connects to a deeper philosophical principle. Chaos and order exist in a symbiotic relationship. Order can never be complete. There is always something outside its boundaries. And what falls outside of order, chaos, isn't simply destructive. It is potential itself, the source of transformation. Raven embodies this principle. He breaks order not randomly, but when order has become too rigid, when it smothers rather than structures. In psychological terms, Raven represents that part of consciousness that refuses to accept things as they are, that insists that there must be another way. Notice what motivates Raven at the beginning. He's tired of blundering around and bumping into things. He wants light not for noble reasons initially, but because darkness is inconvenient to him. It specifically says that the darkness slows him down in his pursuit of food and other fleshly pleasures, and in his constant effort to interfere and change things. This is profoundly honest about how consciousness often develops, not through high-minded spiritual aspiration, but through frustration, through the friction of living in darkness, through wanting to see where we're going. Sometimes our most significant transformations begin simply because we're tired of bumping into things. The old man hoarding the light in nested boxes is also a powerful image. Psychologically, this represents any force, whether internal or external, that keeps consciousness locked away. It might be authoritarian systems that hoard knowledge. It might be traumatic experiences that keep insight buried in protective layers for us as individuals. It might be the parts of ourselves that are terrified of what we might see if we truly looked, of what might change or what might be required to change if we acknowledge the reality. The boxes within boxes suggest that consciousness isn't simply hidden, it is deliberately, multiply protected. Each box is a barrier, a defense, a reason why it's not yet time, or people aren't ready, or this must stay secret, or I don't know what this is, but I don't want to find out. The old man's determination never to share the light, not even with his daughter, reveals how hoarding consciousness damages relationships and perpetuates darkness throughout people and throughout generations. Now, watch Raven's strategy. He doesn't storm the house with force. He doesn't argue or philosophize or try to convince the old man that hoarding the light is wrong. Instead, he transforms. First, he becomes a hemlock needle, something small enough to slip past all defenses, something that looks innocent, something that will be swallowed without awareness. And then he transforms again into a tiny human being growing in the daughter's womb. This is the medicine of approaching from the inside, of becoming small enough to enter, of transformation as a strategy. Sometimes consciousness can't be forced from the outside through argument or through confrontation. It must be coaxed from within, through relationship, through becoming a part of the system first. Raven becomes vulnerable, becomes dependent, becomes beloved, precisely so that he can later become powerful enough to release what's been trapped. The Raven child is deliberately ambiguous. He has a long beak-like nose and a few feathers here and there. He's not fully human and not fully Raven. He's both demanding and clever, both genuinely loved and purely strategic. This liminality, this being neither one thing nor the other, is essential to his role. In our own development, there are times when we must inhabit these in-between spaces. Times when we're learning new ways of being and haven't fully become them yet. Times when we are both sincere and strategic, both vulnerable and calculating. This isn't dishonesty, it's the necessary ambiguity of transformation. The grandfather's love for this strange child is genuine, and this is part of what makes the transformation possible. Relationship creates access that force never could. Here is where the story reveals something deeply profound about how consciousness enters overly ordered systems. The old man's hoarding had become tyranny. Not malicious perhaps, but smothering nonetheless. Too much order or too much control, even with benevolent intent, turns into a prison even for the one maintaining it. Both he and his daughter were trapped in that darkness. Chaos, in the form of Trickster, enters through the most vulnerable doorway: love, relationship, the bonds that we form with those who depend on us. It's not that Raven cynically uses the old man's love, rather that genuine relationship is how the necessary chaos enters the rigid order that we create and that traps us. Sometimes it's our closest, most vulnerable relationships that bring the element of disruption we need to integrate what we're missing when we are left to our own devices. The story doesn't judge this as deception because it recognizes the deeper truth. Without this chaos through relationship, neither the old man nor his daughter would ever have discovered what the light reveals. The relationship was real, and it was also the mechanism for transformation. The slow removal of boxes one by one through much cajoling, carefully balanced with well-planned tantrums, this is often how consciousness emerges. Not in one grand revelation, but through persistent pressure, through knowing when to push and when to coax, through reading what the situation will bear. As the boxes are removed and a strange radiance never seen before began to infuse the darkness of the house, we see a threshold moment. The light is beginning to leak out before it's fully released. This is what happens when consciousness approaches. Things that were invisible begin to show vague shapes, shadows, and hints of form. We're no longer in complete darkness, but we are not yet in full light either. And then comes the transformation and the theft. The moment the light is tossed to him, Ravenchild becomes a huge shining black shadow, wings spread and beak open, waiting. He reveals his true nature, seizes the light and escapes through the smoke hole, that liminal opening between inside and outside, between the human-made structure and the vast world beyond. And Raven doesn't simply steal the light and hide it for himself. He releases it into the world, not carefully, not with a plan, but through accident and necessity. First, the eagle, seeing the light for the first time, immediately recognizes Raven as prey. Consciousness brings not just illumination, but also danger, conflict, the revelation of predator-prey relationships that existed but couldn't be seen in the dark. In his panic to escape, Raven drops half the light and it shatters into the moon and stars. His final piece of light, exhausted by the chase, he releases entirely and it becomes the sun. So light enters the world not through Raven's magnanimity or careful planning, but through chase and panic and exhaustion. Moon, stars and sun, the varying degrees of light that we live by, come from fragments, from accident, from necessity. This is honest about how consciousness spreads in the world. It's rarely through careful control distribution. It's through conflict, through things breaking apart, through being pursued, through finally just letting go because we couldn't hold on any longer. And notice the final image. The old man, weeping over his loss, looks up as the first rays of light enter through the smoke hole. He sees his daughter for the first time. She is as beautiful as hemlock fronds against a spring sky at sunrise. And there is significance in this. The daughter steps into visibility for the first time. She's been there all along, sitting quietly, completely bewildered by the rush of events, it says. In the darkness of her father's fear and control, she couldn't be seen. Perhaps she couldn't even see herself. The moment consciousness enters, her beauty radiates. This is individuation, the self emerging from the shadow of the parental complex, becoming visible not just to the father, but potentially to herself. And in that moment of seeing her clearly, the father himself transforms. The very thing he was protecting is revealed in all of its beauty the moment the light enters. And his seeing her individuation becomes his own transformation. When those that we've tried to control through our fears finally step into the light, we too are changed by what we see. This is a fundamental medicine of this story. Consciousness, seeing clearly, knowing truly, bringing what's hidden into light, is worth the cost of its theft, worth the chaos of its release, worth the accidents that scatter it across the sky. The hoarding of consciousness, whether by individuals or systems or parts of ourselves, keeps the world in darkness where we blunder and bump into things. The trickster's sacred function is to refuse this hoarding, to find the way in, to release what must be released even if the method is morally ambiguous, even if the process is messy, even if the light breaks apart in the releasing. And perhaps most importantly, the story tells us specifically that Raven was always there and always would be. This energy, this refusal to accept darkness, this determination to interfere and change things, this willingness to transform and trick and take enormous risks in order to bring consciousness forward, this is eternal. This precedes creation and will outlast it. In our own lives, when we encounter forces that hoard awareness, that keep understanding locked in nested boxes, that insist, this knowledge is not for you, or let's not look at that. Whether those forces are external authorities or our own protective mechanisms, there is within us a Raven energy that knows how to become small enough to enter, how to work through relationship, how to persist until the box is open, and how to seize the moment when it comes and fly. The cost may be high. Raven turns black. The story doesn't tell us that in this version, but other variants speak of how he was white before and he turned black from the smoke as he escaped. Transformation does leave marks. Bringing consciousness forward changes us. But the alternative is the world before, a world where everything exists in darkness, where mountains and valleys and rivers are there but unseen, where life cannot stir because it cannot see, where even those we love remain invisible to us. This story speaks to anybody who has felt frustrated by systems that hoard insight or knowledge. It speaks to anybody in the process of bringing consciousness to something that's been kept in the dark, whether in therapy, in relationships, in communities, or in your own inner world. It speaks to anyone who has discovered that sometimes the ethical thing requires ethically ambiguous methods. And it speaks to anyone learning that consciousness spreads not through control, but through release, through breaking apart, through letting go. Part 3. Integration. This story calls for integration practices, specific actions that you can take to work with its medicine. First practice: locate what's hoarded in darkness. For the next 3 days, notice where in your life consciousness is being hoarded, kept in nested boxes, protected, hidden. What is it that the light of consciousness is being kept from? This might be information that somebody keeps from you for your own good, understanding that you keep from yourself because seeing clearly might be painful, knowledge within a system that's only shared with certain people, insight that feels too dangerous to fully bring into awareness. Write a brief inventory, not to fix anything yet, but simply to see, where is the light being kept in boxes and why? What would seeing clearly reveal? This practice serves the story's medicine by helping you to recognize where the old man lives, whether in your external world or your internal landscape, and what it is that he's guarding or protecting from. Second practice: work with your raven energy. Once you've identified something being kept in darkness, spend a week noticing your own raven qualities, your capacity for persistence, for finding ways in, for becoming small enough to enter tight spaces, for working through relationship rather than force. Ask yourself, if I were to approach this as Raven does, what would that look like? Not through confrontation, but through transformation. Not through demanding the light, but through making myself small enough to slip past the defenses. Not through force, but through connection. Journal daily about what emerges. You might discover strategies that you didn't know that you had, or you might recognize ways that you're already using this energy without naming it. This practice helps you access that archetypal trickster capacity within you, the part that knows how to bring consciousness forward even when the direct path is blocked. Third practice: track what breaks apart when released. For 2 weeks, when you bring something into consciousness, whether through therapy or honest conversation or self-reflection, allowing yourself to see something you've been avoiding, notice how it doesn't stay whole. Like Raven's light breaking into the moon, the stars, and the sun, awareness often fragments as it enters the world. Different aspects go different directions. Some stay bright, some become scattered, some illuminate the night rather than the day. Rather than seeing this fragmentation as failure, recognize it as a part of how consciousness spreads. Write down what breaks apart and where the pieces go. Notice what gets illuminated by each piece. This practice serves the story's medicine that consciousness does not enter the world tidily, but even its accidents create light where there was darkness, and the moon and stars are as necessary as the sun. The medicine doesn't come from understanding these patterns intellectually, it comes from the practices, from allowing the transformation to happen in your body, in your awareness, in your willingness to work with consciousness, even when the process is ambiguous and messy or scary. The wisdom in these stories waits patiently. I hope this one's medicine found you where you need it. Thank you for listening to Story Medicine. I am Joe Summerfield. Until next time.